In 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed across the Atlantic Ocean and discovered the Americas. Every American schoolchild learns this story. But what if we told you that 87 years earlier, a massive Chinese fleet may have already reached the New World? In 1405, a Muslim admiral named Zheng He commanded the largest naval expedition in human history. A fleet so massive, it made Columbus's 3 tiny ships look like rowboats. His treasure ships were over 400 feet long. Columbus's Santa Maria was barely 85 feet. Zheng He's fleet consisted of over 300 vessels carrying 28,000 men. According to some historians, they may have sailed all the way to the Americas decades before any Europeans set foot there. So why don't we learn about this in school? And did the Chinese really reach America first? Welcome to True North Geography. Today we're diving into one of the history's most controversial mysteries, the voyages of Zheng He and whether China discovered America before Columbus. Let's find out. In 1368, the Ming Dynasty came to power in China. The emperors wanted to demonstrate their power and show that China was the greatest civilization on Earth. The Yongle Emperor took power in 1402 after a brutal civil war. He was ambitious and determined to make China the dominant force in Asia. He needed a fleet that would awe foreign kingdoms and establish lucrative trade routes. He chose a man named Zheng He to lead this unprecedented naval expedition. Zheng He was born in 1371 in Yunnan province. He was a Muslim captured at age 10, castrated, and made a servant to the emperor's son. Despite this horrific beginning, Zheng He rose through the ranks due to his intelligence and military prowess. He stood nearly 7 feet tall, an imposing figure that commanded respect. When the Yongle Emperor took the throne, he appointed Zheng He to lead the most ambitious maritime expedition in history. In 1405, Zheng He's first expedition departed from Nanjing with a fleet that seemed impossible even by modern standards. The flagship treasure ships were reportedly 400 to 500 feet long and 180 feet wide. That's longer than a football field. These ships wouldn't be surpassed in size until the 20th century. The fleet included over 300 ships carrying 28,000 sailors, soldiers, merchants, doctors, astronomers, and translators. For comparison, when Columbus sailed to America in 1492, he had 3 ships and about 90 men. Zheng's fleet was 100 times larger. The treasure ships had multiple decks, watertight compartments, and magnetic compasses, technology that wouldn't reach Europe for decades. The Chinese had been using compasses for navigation since the 11th century. The fleet carried silk, porcelain, tea, and weapons. This wasn't just a trading mission, it was a show of force. Between 1405 and 1433, Zheng He led 7 major expeditions that reached dozens of countries across Asia and Africa. The first voyage in 1405 traveled to Vietnam, Java, Sumatra, and Sri Lanka. Local rulers quickly understood that refusing to trade with China would be dangerous. The second voyage in 1407 reached India. The third voyage in 1409 encountered pirates near Sumatra. Zheng He's forces crushed them, demonstrating that the treasure fleet would use force when necessary. By the fourth voyage in 1413, Zheng He had reached the Persian Gulf and Arabia, bringing back ambassadors and tribute from over 30 kingdoms. The fifth and sixth voyages between 1417 and 1422 pushed even further. Zheng He's fleet reached the east coast of Africa, visiting what is now Somalia, Kenya, and possibly Mozambique. One expedition famously brought back a giraffe, which caused a sensation in the Ming court. By 1433, Zheng had visited over 30 countries and traveled more than 50,000 miles. But some historians believe there was more to these voyages than what Chinese records show. In 2002, British naval officer Gavin Menzies published a book called 1421, The Year China Discovered America. He argued that portions of Zheng He's fleet sailed across the Pacific Ocean and reached the Americas in 1421, 71 years before Columbus. Menzies pointed to several pieces of evidence. First, Chinese maps from the early 15th century appear to show the coastlines of North and South America. The 1763 map of General Zheng He's sailing chart allegedly shows American coastlines with remarkable accuracy. Second, Chinese artifacts have been found in the Americas. In 1882, a Chinese coin from the 15th century was reportedly discovered in British Columbia. Stone anchors similar to those used by Chinese ships have been found off the coast of California. Third, genetic studies suggest some Native American populations have DNA markers consistent with Chinese ancestry, dating back to the 15th century. Fourth, when Chinese conquistadors reached South America, they reported finding chickens, which are native to Asia, not to the Americas. The theory is that Zheng He's fleet sailed across the Pacific, explored the west coast of the Americas, and returned to China via the Indian Ocean. If true, this would mean the Chinese discovered America and mapped the world decades before any European accomplishment. But most historians reject this theory entirely. The academic community has largely dismissed Menzies' claims. Here's why. First, there's no credible documentary evidence. Chinese records from the Ming Dynasty are extensive and detailed. They document Zheng He's voyages meticulously. None mention the Americas. If Zheng He had reached a new continent, it would have been the discovery of the millennium. The Ming court would have documented it extensively. Yet there's complete silence. Second, the maps are controversial. Many cartographers argue that the coastlines identified as the Americas are actually distorted representations of Africa or Asia. Third, the physical evidence is weak. The Chinese coin was likely brought by 19th century Chinese immigrants. The stone anchors could be from later vessels or natural formations. The genetic studies have been challenged by other researchers. Fourth, there's the motivation problem. Why would the Chinese explore the Americas and then never return? Zheng He's voyages were about establishing trade. If he had discovered a new continent full of resources, China would have exploited it. Yet there's no evidence of follow-up expeditions. Finally, sailing across the Pacific in the 15th century would have been extraordinarily difficult. The Pacific is over 12,000 miles from China to the Americas. Columbus nearly died crossing the Atlantic, which is less than half the distance. Could Zheng He's fleet have managed it? Maybe, but without concrete evidence, it remains speculation. Whether or not Zheng He reached America, what happened next is one of history's greatest mysteries. In 1433, Zheng He died. Shortly after, the Ming Dynasty abruptly ended all treasure adventures. The massive fleet was dismantled. Ships were left to rot. China turned inward and abandoned its maritime ambitions entirely. Why? The Yongle Emperor died in 1424. His successors were less interested in expensive naval expeditions. Confucian scholars argued the voyages were a waste of money, and that China should focus on defending against Mongol invasions. The treasure voyages were incredibly expensive. While they brought back exotic goods and tribute, they didn't generate enough profit to justify the expense. By the 1470s, the Ming court had destroyed most records of the treasure voyages. Maps were burned. Shipbuilding techniques were forgotten. China deliberately erased its maritime legacy. This decision had profound consequences. While China turned inward, Europe turned outward. Portuguese and Spanish explorers began their voyage of discovery. They colonized the Americas, established global trade routes, and built empires. China, which had once possessed the most advanced navy in the world, became isolated and eventually vulnerable to European imperialism. If China had continued Zheng He's voyages, the world today would look very different. Instead of European colonization of the Americas, we might have seen Chinese colonization. Instead of English becoming the global language, it might have been Mandarin. But that's not what happened. Did Zheng He reach America? Probably not. The evidence is too weak and the historical consensus is clear. But that doesn't diminish what he accomplished. Zheng He commanded the largest naval fleet in history. He traveled over 50,000 miles, visited 30 countries, and established China as a maritime superpower decades before Columbus. In recent years, China has become to reclaim Zheng He's legacy. Statues have been erected, museums have been built. The Chinese government promotes Zheng He as a symbol of peaceful exploration in contrast to European colonialism. Whether or not Zheng He reached America, his story challenges the Eurocentric narrative of exploration that dominates Western history books. It reminds us that Europe was the only civilization capable of crossing oceans and discovering new worlds. Christopher Columbus sailed to the Americas with 3 small ships and 90 men. Zheng He commanded a fleet of over 300 ships and 28,000 men nearly a century earlier. History is written by the victors. Because China chose to abandon its maritime legacy while Europe embraced exploration, we remember Columbus and forget Zheng He. Maybe it's time we change that. Which fact surprised you the most? Drop it in the comments. And if you enjoyed the deep dive, hit subscribe. This is True North Geography. Thanks for exploring with us.